First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How are you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, very interesting video. It was sent our way through one of our listeners or viewers. They want to know, and this is a new person on the job, what should the inmates expect from an officer? Now, we're talking about a professional dialogue here because there's a lot of things we could say. We could say inmates expect a lot of toilet paper. Inmates expect to get over it. That's not what the dialogue's about. The dialogue literally is a question of who I need to be, carry myself professionally around the inmates population. So I think it is a great dialogue. We are going to have a new guest. This is interesting. We're going to have a gentleman named John Lawrie, correct?
Yes.
And John, you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Certainly. Actually, it's Jay is fine. So my name is Jay Lawrie. I am the chair of the Criminal Justice Department at Albertus Magnus College. Prior to assuming this position 8 years ago, I spent 20 years working in the Connecticut prison system. I did my entire career at McDougall Correctional Institution in Suffield. All 20 years were spent working in various capacities of unit management, started as an officer, retired as a unit manager. So that's my professional background.
And by the way, thank you for your service. You know what I think is great is when you have someone with experience crossing into education, because it's a great way to mold those minds that are coming in wanting to learn about the profession.
That's absolutely something that's my biggest passion is education and also preparing staff for the next step. Corrections is one of the few jobs, the day you start, the day you can leave. So there's different ways to prepare for it. For me personally, it was an academic educational route. So,
yeah, I think it's a great way to evolve the educational system. Now, guys, don't forget today's video is brought to you by Guardian RFID. From inmate tracking to cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence, Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. Love Guardian. They help me with what I do. And also, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor and we come back. Let's dive into what the inmates expect from our correctional officers in the system. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, and we're back. So first, let me just put this out there on the table, because I am sure this is drilled into any correctional officer once they're in the academy or definitely once they enter the facility. When dealing with the inmate population, you want to be firm, fair, and consistent. Now, with that said, we have explored this topic before. Actually, I have a book coming out in the market soon. It's going to be talking about what to expect on your first day or just some advice to get by your first maybe year as a rookie. And part of the dialogue, obviously, is being firm, fair, and consistent. And we had a discussion a while back, me and Russ. And what we talked about was the behavior, which is being firm, fair, and consistent is about the behavior. It's outward. It's what you provide to the population. Russ was quick to say, you know what, Gange, I'm going to switch that. Being firm, fair, and consistent is really a look inwards. It's who you have to be with yourself so then you can carry that outward behavior. So basically, if you're looking to be firm, fair, and consistent in the outward behavior, then you have no foundation. You have no belief in what you're doing. So with that said, being firm, fair, and consistent, the way to look at it is that's who you have to be with yourself inward before you can go ahead and provide that outward to the population. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think people actually view it that way?
I think absolutely. I think it's incredibly important. And as you said, you have to own it. Corrections, in my experience, as an officer dealing with inmates, it's one of the most unique relationships you have in society. I think generally speaking, a lot of people don't like conflict. They don't like confrontation. They want people to like them and accept them. And, as an officer, it's not always the case. I think for, as a young officer, I think it's sometimes one of the most difficult things for an officer, in my experience, to say was no. It's one of the easiest words you can, it's easy to say no to an inmate, but inmates will find ways to try and get over on you. So again, it's, you have to, not only do you have to be able to, to do that, but you have to own it as that's your decision. You're not putting that decision off on the administration. You're making whatever call you're making because that's what you're saying and you're running that block or you're running that situation. So I think absolutely, I think owning that role is incredibly important. And the consistency is probably the biggest thing. I know that I dealt with a lot of officers who, the one thing that inmates disliked more than anything was inconsistency. Come in one day laughing, joking, talking about the ball game, and then come in next day and just breaking them down over some petty stuff. So my thing was, whatever your personality is, you don't have to be the nicest person in the world. You just got to be consistent. So I obviously, I absolutely think that the consistency is the most important.
What's great about that too is in the book we have on the market, the Inmate Manipulation Decoded, we talk about how inmates manipulate the why, whether, they look to see if the why is external, like I'm only saying no because the supervisor says it, or is the neuro internal? Do you believe in that no? You know what I mean? Is the no coming directly from you? And I love what you said about consistency being the anchor of the being firm, fair, and consistent. Because for me, what I thought, again, is when you're consistent, and again, being consistent is not being predictable. And I want people to realize that's not what we're getting at. Being consistent brings about a level of confidence and trust in what you do. And what I mean by that is, let's look at inwards first. The more consistent you are, the more confident you're going to be in how you deal with the situations. The more confident you are, the more you start to trust yourself in the situations that are coming your way. Because again, working in corrections, you're going to have a lot of crazy things coming your way. So consistency will bring about confidence, which brings about trust. And that's the inward side. Definitely, if you feel that on the inward side, then you know for a fact that that's going to carry out to how the inmates see you. Like, yeah, this gentleman or this officer is consistent. And that consistency is giving him a level of confidence. And you know what? We do trust this officer to be efficient in what they do. So do you believe that consistency brings that confidence and trust to be effective?
I think absolutely. I mean, in my experiences, generally speaking, shift change. Blocks locked up for count, pop them out for chow. They're walking out there looking to see who's got the block today. They want to see who's in control, who's the rover, and they know basically what to expect from that. And again, good, bad, or indifferent, they seem to be more comfortable with that. They knew if Lawrie was working the block, this is the way things are going to be. There's no real sense in arguing. It is what it is. And again, I think that, and as you said, that confidence comes with it. And that's one of those things that only comes with time. I mean, obviously, I started the job back in '93. It was a much different environment. And as a rookie officer, I'm sure, if I were to look back, I made a ton of mistakes. But that's what you learn to grow from that. And, you get played a couple of times and they get over on you and you learn to, again, kind of, stand up and to your point, I think it's one of the most important. You own that decision, whether it's a new policy or it's not. I'm not telling you can't do this because the captain said you can't do it. I'm telling you can't do it because I said you can't do it. I don't care whether you agree with it or disagree. That's not the point. This isn't a discussion. It is what it is. And I think a majority of the time, inmates respect it. And the ones that don't are the ones that are going to try and get over on you anyway. And that's going to be what your day consists of.
And you know what's great about this too is that I believe inmates, the ones that want to do their time, the ones that actually are going to, invest in a change in themselves. They do want staff that they can trust. Mm-hmm. Again, people talk about, inmates like to play their games. Yeah, okay, maybe they will, and maybe they spot some level of vulnerability. But I'm going to tell you something right now. When they see that level of vulnerability and they pounce, don't think that they trust that staff member to be effective in their job. Don't think that they trust that staff member to save their life if need be. What inmates, again, for the inmates that are looking to do something different, to kind of change that mindset and be productive, they do look for officers that will not be easily compromised, that have a level of integrity. And when I talk about integrity, guys, I'm talking about, when the supervisors aren't around, how you carry yourself. I mean, that's the key. But I think those are the officers that they know with those consistent practices, it's going to be a good day, or at least it's going to be a safe day.
Yes.
Because you know what's funny, John or Jay, when the person that is in the level of authority, if they are vulnerable or corrupt, then there is no safety being provided. So what's your thoughts on the inmates that are looking to do their time to, that relationship with an officer that is defined by integrity?
And again, I think it's huge. And I go back in over my career, I would say the majority of my day, and for people outside of corrections, they may not understand that, but the majority of my day, I would say 95% of inmates just want to do their bit, want to do their time, wanted to get through it. And they liked that safety. And they knew that if certain individuals are around the block, certain things are going to be done a certain way. And as you said, that safety is going to be maintained. That consistency is going to be maintained. And I to your point, I think that's huge. I mean, in the job is safety and security. And we have very few physical tools, guns, no tasers, no things. So you have your verbal interactions, and that's it. And you have, to your point, you have your integrity. And one thing that, I don't mean to speak in broad terms, but I think generally speaking, inmates were very good at sizing someone up and reading their character, knowing what they were about. And if they may not like them, but if they have trust in them, then I think the shift goes pretty well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the trust factor, guys. We at no point are saying we are to trust an inmate, but what you need to get is that inmates are supposed to trust us. Yes, guys, that's the case. And guys, even when the person asked me this question, what should inmates expect from us? We're not looking at inmates on an individual level. We're looking at what the agency expects us to do with the inmates that we supervise. So again, being firm, fair, consistent, but again, the key, that integrity, that level of trust, for those inmates that are literally, they're trying to do their time and they want to go home. I mean, they're going to want someone that they can trust to be effective in that unit, to do those searches and, to make sure that when you find that contraband, or you're making the effort to find the contraband, that, you are the person that's going to make that facility safe for them to reside as well. Again, of course, we're making it safe for our peers, but don't forget, every time we do our searches and we're finding that contraband and, we're getting rid of what could be threats to our area of responsibility, that's also directly protecting the inmates that reside there. So I believe they also want an officer that's on point with their searches, that's not complacent, that, goes above and beyond to make sure that their area is as safe and secured as possible. So do you think that if you have an inmate that's looking to move forward and do the right thing, that they want an officer that's actively searching and being effective?
I think absolutely. And that's it. I mean, and again, the majority of inmates just want to get through their day, get through their week, get through their bid safely. And they know what that environment is like. And they know when things go bad, how bad things can get. So I firmly believe that. And again, I mean, they're certainly not coming out and thanking you and patting you in the back for doing your job. But every so often, you'll have an inmate that will come up to you and in some, whether direct or indirect way, and you'll know that it's resonating with them, that they have an appreciation for what you're doing. Again, they're not going to maybe come out and say it, but even if it's just something like, a nod or a, hey, what's up, or something that, they're watching you and they appreciate and respect what you're doing.
Right. And, also inmates, again, the inmates that are looking to do their time, they also want to be respected. I get that. There's a lot of people when they enter this profession, they feel they have to be ultra aggressive. And that's just to me, that's wrong. I mean, you could play the role, but you don't have to advertise it every day. They know what their role is. When you go into a correctional facility and you're wearing that uniform, the inmates know at this point, this is their role. And at that point, this is your role. And it's not something you have to advertise every day. It's kind of like, you've been given that position of trust. And most of the time, the inmates are going to, that's your role. We expect that. But with that said, when you have the officers that kind of lean on that uniform, kind of lean on that authority, kind of not really much of a backbone, just kind of lean on policy and procedures, without no I'm not saying to violate it, but there is discretion as you start to gain experience. You wind up being seen as weak. What's your thoughts on that, John?
100%. Yeah. And again, I mean, just kind of to circle back to original point, I think, and I'll be, in fairness, I mean, if I really were to go back and look at myself when I started early in my career, I think I can say, that I had that misconception. There was probably a part of me back then. Again, it was a much different time. I'm not making excuses for it. I'm just being honest that, I thought, it was difficult for me to realize that my job was not to make the inmate's life miserable. Their punishment is their incarceration. But for a lot of officers, they felt that, they came in and it's their job to make it worse. And it was kind of a cultural thing too. And as culture and times began to change, that became the shift. And that, to your point, it's not about making the inmate's life miserable and punishing them. Their punishment is the fact that they're incarcerated. Your job is to maintain safety and security. And to your point, you accomplish that through the character traits you talked about, that consistency. And again, and obviously there are, there's a lot of officers, and I'm just being honest, there was a lot of officers I worked with through my career had no business doing the job. I mean, they came in miserable, and and whether it was, using, like you said, leaning on the uniform to justify everything they did and refusing to stand up for themselves, or taking it to the extreme and abusing in a lot of ways. So I think you have to be, an individual, like, you are greatly outnumbered. It is a dangerous environment. It is not always easy to say and do what is expected of you, but that's, in my view, that's why we're hazardous duty. That's why you're putting that, if you don't want to do that, go work at it. That's kind of how I thought about it. But, and again, to your point, I think it's incredibly important that officers and staff learn to own that authority they have. And I don't mean necessarily authority in an overpowering way, but just the way that you control and run a particular situation.
Yeah, leaning on the uniform, leaning on your supervisor, especially if you're expecting that to give you the authority when you are running that unit. Inmates are conditioned to the uniform. It's not like, a normal person on the street getting pulled over by a police officer and all of a sudden you kind of take the position and do what needs to be done because maybe you're not used to getting pulled over every day. So that officer's presence, the sirens, everything, kind of you react to that. But eventually what happens here is that, in a prison setting, that they're used to the uniform. It doesn't carry that level of authority. What does is really the person who's wearing it. So if you, start to abuse that level of authority and you kind of think you can hide behind the uniform as it's going to protect you, you're going to find out real quick that you're going to, lose that unit. Would you agree, Jay?
100%. And again, there is nothing, if a staff member thinks they are somehow going to do their job through intimidation, absolutely not. Inmates are not intimidated by, I don't care how big you are, how strong you are, what your MMA, but a lot of the officers kind of came in with that attitude. And in my view, that's not what it's about. And the inmates read right through that. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that you need to carry yourself in a way that is confident, and doesn't have to be arrogant. And as I said, I mean, I think, one of the worst things you could do as an officer, the lieutenant's touring the block and the inmate has a t-shirt hanging over the rail and you go running around, that t-shirt's been on the rail for the whole shift. But now all of a sudden you hear lieutenants coming down. So you start running around telling everybody to take the t-shirt off the rail. That just makes you look bad. You can't run your block. If you have to, if you're not doing it all the time, don't do it at all. And I think that's, maybe to what you were speaking about, again, that's just that consistency. And and inmates see that, and they see it as a sign of weakness. And I think they would lose a lot of respect for those staff members.
Yeah, I think they also want someone that has control of themselves and their emotions. One of the things, I think I've only probably yelled in my almost 20 years, maybe 3 times. But I will tell you, because I'm not one to yell, I'm just kind of, I don't get me wrong, I'm still authoritative. I can still present that level of authority, but I'm not one to yell. But when I did, the unit would go quiet because, they've never seen me at that level. And now sometimes you have officers that are coming out at that highest level all the time. And then, the inmates are like, okay, well, that's just him. And there's no reaction to that. But then when you get the officer who's calm, who finally gets to that point where they have to, get a message across, however aggressively, everybody shuts down because, again, they're not at that heightened level at all times. So control to me is extremely important, right?
I think absolutely. And that's it. Well, once you start off at the highest level, if you maintain that, there's nowhere else to go from there. So, to your point, I think that kind of level, dealing with individuals in a respectful manner, talking, communicating, and then when the situation presents itself and then there is a need to escalate to the point you were talking about, then it has some credibility to it. If you have an officer who's always screaming, once, they stop listening, and I think that's a great point.
Yeah. And also inmates, again, we're looking at the inmates that are trying to do their time and be productive. Empathy. Okay. Empathy is not sympathy, guys. So when most people see, it can't be empathetic, when they start defining it, they don't realize that they're defining sympathy. Empathy is objective, and it kind of actually opens up to really good, positive interactions with the inmate population. All it is just understanding where the inmate's coming from, but not necessarily wearing their shoes and being so invested, which means that I could understand where you're coming from, but I'm not blinded by emotion to go ahead and you can use that now to take advantage of me. Like obviously sympathy, a little bit different, an inmate trying to pull you out of your prescribed role by connecting you to some, something emotional in which now you're blinded. You're not doing anything logically. You're doing it based on emotion. But what's your thoughts? Again, you worked in a maximum security prison. Do you think empathy helps?
Absolutely. And again, I think it's important to make that distinction between sympathy. You're not sympathetic. You're not feeling bad for the inmate and allowing them to do something that even you may see as minor, because that may make the inmate feel a little better and kind of get them out of that, that emotional state they're in. That's not what it's, to your point. But you can, I would say that, there are, I would say the majority of inmates that I dealt with in my career, you could you could see how they got in that situation. I'm not saying I condone it. I'm not saying I understand it, but you can look at certain situations, understand how that happened. And again, I think that's very important. And again, it can't cloud your judgment. It can't affect the decisions you make, but it can help you process the environment a little better.
Right. And I also, one more thing, obviously correctional officers wear lots of hats, guys. When you work in a correctional facility, you are a correctional officer, you are going to be their resource, or at least the person who's initially going to get things moving, whether it's a code or, maybe the one that's giving them the guidance along the way. And for people that don't think that correctional officers play that role, guys, corrections has evolved. Our interactions with the inmates are a lot more than they ever were done before. We don't sit idle in a world that doesn't move. We are the ones that should be encouraging those inmates to go where they need to go, because again, we have the most positive interactions with them, and we need to take advantage of that. But I think the inmates expect us also to be a continuation of that service. And what I mean by that is, when you have inmates that are looking to do the right thing, the schooling, the programming, stuff like that, I think because again, we have a lot of that interaction with them, they expect us to kind of have an understanding of where they need to be, and also to relate with the service providers who we can continue what's being done, in those classrooms, in the program environment. We are a continuation of that. And for anybody that believes that we don't play that role, don't minimize what we do, because believe it or not, guys, playing that role is a very important function that relates to safety and security, because it gives the inmates something that they've worked for that they do not want to lose, but also because you're encouraging them to do the right thing, it kind of keeps their mind busy and away from other thoughts, which could include violence or any forms of aggression. So what's your thoughts on, wearing those many hats, and how does that relate to our, how the inmate, what the inmates expect from us?
I think that's huge. And again, a lot of people, obviously, corrections, generally speaking, is somewhat shrouded in, kind of a mysterious world, and, what the job of the CO is. And to your point, it runs the gamut. I mean, obviously it's an authoritative role. It's taking count, it's locking up, but also a lot of the job is just walking around and talking, and, not developing friendships. That's not what I mean. But you can develop different rapport with different inmates. And, I remember there's this one inmate in particular. We as a unit manager, we were butting heads every day. I mean, he would act up, go to SEG for 7 days, come back, and this just went on for weeks. And then finally one day I'm like, what's it going to take for this to stop? And he said, colored pencils. And I said, what? He goes, I want some colored pencils. I went to school, talked to the art, got pencils, half a ream of paper, gave them to him. Next day, walked by the cell. He's like, hey, Lawrie. And instead of that being followed with a trail of, really offensive things to me, showed me the picture he drew. And with a sense of pride that was palpable, and again, it wasn't, you can get pencils through commissary. I wasn't giving him anything he couldn't have. He couldn't afford them at the time, but just that one connection. And for the next, 5 or 6 years, we no longer had an issue again. I wasn't staying 3-4 hours late doing paperwork. He wasn't going in and out of SEG. He was able to kind of focus a little bit more. And, so that's one example, I think, of ways that an officer or staff member can work with other areas. I think the programming, obviously, now it's more so than ever, we're with the focus on community reentry and getting inmates out, successful reintegration. What type of individual do you want leaving your facility? Now, the facility I was at, the majority of inmates were doing over 75 years to life. Many weren't getting out. For those that were, you try and want to make it better. But even still, and I would tell people, even if this person is never getting out, they still want to if they choose to want to make a better life for themselves while they're incarcerated, I would do whatever I could to support that within reason, within the realm of, what is appropriate behavior. So.
Right. And again, it's kind of where corrections has evolved into. And I want to just take note of the story you just mentioned. So an inmate asking for colored pencils was actually something that is offered. So again, you went to the education department who oversees all that and made the decision, you know what? It's not a problem. It's not like you did something on your own without any approval. You went there and they made, let's do what we got. And now you have an inmate that's being constructive with their time and drawing, and whatever you do, you never took it as a gift. I mean, sometimes we have an audience that, may look at something a little bit more extreme, but I want to make sure that we outline the steps here in this story, where the basis of the story was to show how that officer was able to kind of connect the inmate with the resources in the education department and through the proper channels.
Absolutely. And in fairness, by that point, I had 16 years in the job. I was a unit manager. So, and you're absolutely right. That wasn't something I would do fresh out of the academy. But as you do the job, as you progress, as you develop those, that level of rapport, I think, and again, as long as it's done within the parameters of what is acceptable, I think that's fine. I reached out, I worked with the education department. So what do we have? I said, I got somebody. So I think that's a great point. Again, I don't want to make that. Yes, you're absolutely right. I can see where that may be a little problematic for maybe a younger officer or someone who's not as established. But I think one of the benefits to doing the job that long is you kind of earn the ability to maybe be a little more flexible in the sorts of decisions that you make.
Right. But also as a unit manager, you have a higher level of authority, and also keeping that inmate busy, again, still within your prescribed role, not breaking rules, kind of helps the officer in the unit that day as well, because again, the inmate being constructive with their time. And guys, I just want to mention this too, guys, is that I think William Young said it once, that the rookies can't expect to do what the experienced officers do. There is some level of discretion that comes with being on the job for 16 years. And with that discretion comes the proper routes that you take. Like the moment you said that, you went to the education department, made it be known, and then went ahead and did something that was productive. And I believe we still need to reinforce our role with those other departments, kind of bridge that gap, because they understand, or should understand, the civilian side, how they fit in. But sometimes we may not and how we truly fit into their world. What service are we providing them? So to kind of see that connection really matters, because I think in the end, people don't realize this, but correctional officers are a very big piece in the rehabilitation that's happening behind the wall. Hey, Jay, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, like I said, I think, my advice, to any, new officer, anybody going, think about going to career. I think it's a great time. I think for individuals who are looking to go into criminal justice in general and correction specifically, I think now is a really good time, because I think we're getting the type of individual who's going into it for the right reasons. Again, the job, it's not the late 80s, and you're not as, the populations maybe aren't as violent. We're not dealing with the same issues with gangs. And now it's more about community reentry. It's about rehabilitation. And I think that if individuals have the proper mindset, I think it could be a tremendous career opportunity.
Yeah. And as always, guys, the reason why we're having this dialogue, guys, is because correction is evolving, but this isn't dialogues that are meant to be extreme. So obviously there are many that still work in those violent facilities, and you need to give staff the tools to be effective. But with that said, there are other things that we can also provide within our function that I think people think custody needs to get permission for it, when actuality is that they are involved in that. They just don't know it. And I think that's part of the evolution, is to get them to understand what that role is. I've had officers in my time tell me that they've had some impacts on the inmate population, but they felt the need to kind of quickly say, but by the way, I wasn't over involved with them, and we get it, universal precaution, I get it, but universal precaution does not mean that we don't interact with the inmates at all. Universal precaution means we're the ones that have to be a little bit wary of what's coming our way. But having said that, if we keep on having in the back of our mind that we're not a part of this, that we're not a part of the rehabilitation, and yet we're the ones that are having the most interaction with these inmates, we're losing out on a very big piece of what could totally have a very big influence on the inmates that are preparing to leave. So,
yeah.
All right, so no, get.
No, I think it's important. And, so historically, in my experience, there was always kind of maybe this clash between, custody and treatment. And custody staff, kind of view treatment a certain way, and vice versa. And to your point, I think sometimes when an officer hears treatment or counseling, or they look at it in a different way. It's not necessarily as you said earlier, that sympathetic, but it's just, again, it's providing the inmate a consistent environment where they can do the things they need to do if they choose to make the changes they want to make. And to that extent, I think the role of the correction officer is invaluable.
I love that. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier talks to you, brave men and women that work in correction. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.